Whakatakata hau ki te uru, whakatakata hau ki te tonga, ki a mā kine ki uta, ki a mā taratara ki tai, e hi aki ana te atakura, he teo, he hoka, he hauhu, a ti hei mauri ora. A te mihi tuatahi, mihi ki nā atua kaha rawa, ka ho mai o kaha, ho mai o aroha, ki a mātua i tēnei wā, i nā wā katoa hoki. A ka huri au taka whakaro ki nā tini aitua, e nā mati, o ia marae, o ia takiwā, o ia motu, haere, haere atura. Haere ki Hawaii ki nui, Hawaii ki roa, Hawaii ki pāmamau, e nā mate, moi mai, oki mai. Apati hono tātou, hono rātou, kia rātou, apati hono tātou, hono tātou, kia tātou, a te hongo ora. E nā kaimahi, e nā kaikaunihira, e nā memo te hāpori, e mā taki nei, tēnā koutou. Nau mai hara mai ki tēnei hui, o tēnei komiti, o te wai me te whenua, nei te mihi, a tēnā koutou, Tēnā koutou, kei roro i te tūnui o tēnei whare o tātou, i roto i te rohi o nai tuahuriri, tēnā koutou. Kia ora everybody, just standing to acknowledge everybody, welcome us to our meeting, and I'll hand back over to the chair. Thank you, Claire.
Kia ora, Craig, thank you very much for that. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's Water and Land Committee meeting, the 18th of October 2023. And before we get too far, I will just pass over to Councillor Mackenzie, who's just going to acknowledge the passing of a stalwart from mid-Canterbury.
South Canterbury, actually.
Yes, you're right, across the bridge, across the river.
Sorry, yeah.
Button.
Yeah.
Button.
Yeah. We're just recognising Ro Ackland from Mount Peel Station, who died a couple of weeks ago from a massive stroke. Ro came from Fielding in the North Island, married John Ackland at Mount Peel Station, and in the early days of the concept of land care groups, she formed and chaired the Upper Rangitata Gorge Land Care Group in 1999. And initially it was to control broom, rabbits, and also to try to look after some of the historic culture, some of the links to the early history of the Upper Rangitata, including the Mount Harper ice rink, which is, as you go up the gorge, above the gorge, it sits in under Mount Harper on the right-hand side as you're going up the river, and various historic huts further up the gorge. And I think one of the highlights was they won the Supreme Canterbury Award for overall excellence and work on private land in 2010. She'll be sorely missed in the Rangitata Gorge community. She was a very strong and forthright leader in South Canterbury, and she'll be missed by the South Canterbury community.
And I'd just like to endorse what Ian said. I mean, my first came across Ro. She was very forthright and very determined in terms of the things that they were doing up there, in terms of clearing some of the islands within the braids for cover and those sorts of things. And she did push on, and she was even really quite hard on her son Johnny, who took over the farm in terms of things that he was doing. And so she was a true environmentalist, and really early in the piece, 1999 Mac. So that's 24 years, 25 years ago. So she will be missed.
Kia ora. Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie and Chair Scott, for just that acknowledgement. For those who aren't aware, I think you used Ro, because obviously that's what you're known by locally, but that was Rosemary Eklund that was being referred to there. So I just want to acknowledge today we've got Councillor Cranwell, who's the chair of this committee, online. who will be online and offline occasionally during the day. And we've got Councillor Diche online, and we should have Councillor Karakia coming in. He's there now. Thank you very much.
I'm here.
Great one there. Thank you. And we have received an apology from Councillor Edge for today's meeting. Is there any other apologies? I think that takes care of everybody. Okay, thank you. Does anybody have any conflicts of interest with today's agenda that they wish to raise now or have noted? There being none, we'll move on to agenda item 4, which is public forums, deputations and petitions. I haven't been advised of any, so there is none for today. And item 5 is the extraordinary and urgent business. I understand there is no extraordinary or urgent business. We haven't been advised of none, and none coming from the floor, which takes us to notice of a motion, and I'm not aware of any notices. That's the case. We'll then move on to agenda item 7, which is the minutes. And agenda item 7.1 there on page 9 of your agenda is the unconfirmed minutes. I'll just ask for any matters of accuracy relating to these minutes before we move the recommendation. If there is none, could I have a mover and a seconder for the recommendation which is on the board? Councillor Southworth and Councillor Ward. So, okay, so all those in favour that they are true and correct. Well, that we're confirming the minutes of the Water and Land Committee meeting held on the 30th of August 2023. Right? Against? Carried. All in silence. Thank you. So that takes us to the report items today. So that's page 18 of your agenda. I'll ask Dr. Tim Davey, our Director of Science, to introduce this report.
Thank you, Chair. So you have outlined the resolutions from previous meetings. As you can see, a significant number of them are green and complete. I'll just concentrate on the ones that are in orange in progress and give you an update on those. So on page 20, there is the Canterbury Water Management Strategy Fish Screen Working Group final report. And following the discharge of the working group, which was the resolution, letters have been sent to all of the members, thanking them from the chair, from Chair Scott, and so that has formally been done. In terms of the number 3, you'll note that it is coming to the next meeting of the Water and Land Committee in about a month's time. I don't have anything specific to report in on that, other than that it has been thought of for the work program over for next year, and that is what will be reported in on. So I don't have anything specific to report in on, apart from that it is coming and that it is being thought of for how this group, a group similar to this, could be used for future work around fish screens. Moving on to page 21, the Otu Wharakai item, report 8.5, Otu Wharakai Ashburton Lakes Lessons Learned report. In terms of what's in progress, and I'm looking at particularly resolution 2 and 2.1, continue to work with all landowners to ensure appropriate authorisations. That is happening. We have met with one of the landowners, and we'll be meeting with another one, and 2 of the within. I think it's within the next 2 weeks. I can't quite remember, but that's an ongoing piece of work, and we staff are meeting with them to look at the various authorisations. And I say various authorisations because there are different parts of the authorisation that are required around consenting. So that's being worked through. The Otu Wharakai working group is It's always been working, but it's got the specific issue around the integrated management plan. The work has started. A contract has been let for somebody to pull all of that together. So that has started. In terms of 2.3, continue to work with LINZ. I can report in that the Chief Executive of LINZ has written to our chair in response to the letter that was sent from our chair and the Minister for the Environment to LINZ, and have responded. And what it really does, the letter does, is it supports all of the things that are outlined here in terms of working in the working group and looking at their statutory responsibility. And then the final resolution 3 about investigate the consideration of assessing the impacts of land use activity on outstanding natural landscape values. That is going to the working group when they meet next week. So that again is ongoing. And then moving on to page 23, drinking water nitrate testing. I'll just ask Taflin Bradford James, who can report in on the progress there of the orange bit, but with so Taff, I'll leave.
Thank you. I can just give you a quick update too on the first piece, which is marked as completed in the resolutions, but just to give councillors some visibility of what's been done through that campaign. So if you'll recall, we were putting that out through social media to do a campaign ourselves, and we worked on updating the drinking water guidance, testing guidance for private wells on our website. And we worked in with the territorial authorities, having discovered that quite a lot of the information that was out there wasn't up to date. So our team here have worked on the updated information. We've updated that on our website, and we have shared that with the territorial authorities. So where they also carry that information, we're all consistent and it's all up to date. We did paid advertising on social media, and we got 27,500 or just over impressions through that. And the drinking water testing guidance page on our website, we were increasing our views from sort of 200 odd users to just shy of 1,000 users coming through to that. So that information is being accessed. So that was our first part was the campaign piece, and the second part was to investigate whether we could and should be running some testing events. We contacted Te Whatu Ora, and they have said that they will come back to us. They were in the process of looking at which team was doing what internally. So that was a couple of months ago. So we're just going to let them have some time to do that. But we will follow that up, obviously, before Christmas. We've also contacted the territorial authorities again on whether they would like to now do these events with us. They have said that because it's not their core obligation in the same way that it's not ours, but they've actually said that they would be interested in finding out what we're doing rather than actually coming in with us on this. So basically to keep them informed on what activity is happening. But that doesn't mean they wouldn't be involved, but at this stage they don't want to be part of investigating how that could work. So from the zone committee side of things, Selwyn, Waihora, Waimakariri and OTOP have all expressed an interest. Possibly Banks Spencer and Christchurch West Melton might come in as well on that. We would be looking February, March at the earliest to run those. So basically getting past the holiday period. One of the suggestions is that the committees might want to be looking at getting an external expert in, an independent person in, because there is the optics of this being seen as being Environment Canterbury's role to do this private well testing, which it isn't, but obviously putting on the event and having a degree of independence there. And again, something that's come back from the zone committees, as we've talked about right at the beginning, was that it's not just nitrate testing, it's all potential contaminants that people should be aware of if they've actually got their own private supplies. So that sufficient, Chair?
Thank you for that. Just one, I'll come to Chair Scott in a minute. Just one question there of clarity. You the paper refers to Te Mana Ora. That's a different section. You refer to Te Whatu Ora.
Yeah, so community public health, as it was, is so Te Mana Ora. Yeah, sorry.
Just to clarify, so Te Mana Ora is community and public health within Te Whatu Ora, which is the Department of Health.
Chair Scott.
Thank you, Claire. So I've been to one of these already. The OTOP committee ran. and had my the well water tested, and we've got a level of 5, I think, in our well. I think it's been historically like that for a long time. And I don't know whether we can do this or not, but I'm going to ask the question whether and there were people there that had quite high levels, and your responsibility is your own responsibility to do that. It's just an indication that we're doing as a bit of a public service. I'm wondering whether we shouldn't be providing some advice to those people who are in a band that could be an issue, because I'm not too sure. Maybe I didn't stay around long enough to get any, but I'm not too sure where that is. So there needs to be some sort of a little package there if we're going to do this and people get numbers, because you get them instantly. What these numbers are, what do they mean, and what should you do about it, and what's the opportunity to actually, bolt on a treatment system or whatever. That's my question.
Thank you. That same question's come out of Waimakariri too, so I'll hand over to.
Yes, thank you, Chair. And that when we have run these events, the idea is that and it has happened that there are people available to answer those sorts of questions, and we also have information available. And Tafflin pointed to the to our website, which has quite a lot of information around what do these numbers mean and what might the response be. The only thing I would just note, though, is that that's why we need to work with Te Whatu Ora and Te Mana Ora, because although we can talk about the what's led to the nitrate levels and some of the things, the actual health implications, we don't hold that expertise, and often those are the questions that are asked, and that's why we have worked with Whatu Ora.
Question building on that is whether Taumata Arawai should have a role in terms of that information around, if you've got particular pollutants in your water or something you're concerned about, what's the best solution, what would what the price range, or there's information that could be provided that's quite specific. And I know one of the things that's sort of perhaps concerned me is when I've heard of people who've deepened their wells and then found they've managed to reduce the nitrate level by all of 1-2 milligrams per litre, and it's still relatively high for what they might have thought they'd get to for quite a substantial cost. So, is Taumata Arawai the organisation that might provide that, because it's actually something that's of importance nationally, isn't it?
Yes and no. Taumata Arawai are in a very similar situation to us as a regulator around it, without necessarily being the experts on what a response might be. So that's where we've tended to rely on the Te Whatu Ora for the health advice, and then territorial authorities around what might actually, although what we have tried to do is pull that information together, so it's not dependent. Some of it's not dependent on having somebody there absolutely on the day. We do have a lot of that information pulled together.
Anybody else have any other questions of clarity now that we've had this presentation? Craig, you're on. Okay, if there are no further questions of clarification, thank you, Tim, for that. I will, we've got the motion up already, very quick. The motion there, the recommendation there is that the Water and Land Committee notes the status of the previous resolutions provided in the Water and Land Committee resolutions status report October 2023. Do I have a mover for that? Thank you, Chair Scott. Seconder, Councillor East. Is there any further discussion that people would like to have around this? Vicky?
Yeah, just to make a comment, it's really good to see, and pleased that our websites are up to date and that we've got good information for people, because it is of concern to the public. So yeah, great that staff pick this up and that we're making some good progress. Thank you.
There isn't any further discussion. We'll now vote on this. All those in favour say aye. Against? It's carried. Thank you very much. So that now takes us to agenda item 8.2, which is the soil quality monitoring. So that's page 25 of your agenda there. I'll hand over to Dr. Tim Davey again as our Director of Science. She's going to introduce this report and the speakers, which are both in the room.
Thank you, Chair. And just while it's being set up, I'll introduce the speakers. Looking in the direction I can see, there's Zach Hill on the right. Zach is the team leader of the Land Resources team. And then Dr. Matthew or Matt Riddle, who is a senior scientist in the same team. And what Matt is going to just talk through a little bit more detail around what is measured and what it means in the presentation that has been circulated beforehand. The Land Resources team within the science group does what most of our teams do in the science group, which is run monitoring programs and also provide advice, some of which comes out of the monitoring, but also advice based on general knowledge and other research that's going on in the land space. So it's around monitoring advice around land use and soil matters. And I'll hand straight on to Matt, who's going to talk a little bit about, in a bit more detail, about the soil quality monitoring program. And Matt, as we explained, first of all, you push the right-hand button on the microphone there, but also take the paper as read, so you can just quickly on. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Tim, for the introduction. And thank you, Chair and Councillors, for the opportunity to come and speak today about our soil quality monitoring program we have at Environment Canterbury. As Tim said, I'll assume that the paper we've supplied is read, so I won't go into too much background detail. So a little bit of basics to start off with. Why is soil so important? Why do we care about it? Well, it's vital for our plants, for growing, for food, fibre production, for growing trees, for the oxygen that we breathe. It does a fantastic job at filtering out things like effluent, chemicals, heavy metals, pesticides to help stop them getting into our waterways. They're also good for removing things like E. coli, stop them again from getting into our waterways. Storing water, so for plant growth and also for flood resilience, and a very good carbon storage. And there is also the cultural significance. In Te Ao Māori, there's a strong whakapapa connection between people and soil. The health and well-being is based on the whakapapa connections to soil through maintenance of values such as mana, Māori, tapu, and wairua. And we're also obliged under the Resource Management Act to provide and monitor reports on the soil as a resource. Back in the 90s, several regional councils, MFE, Crop and Food, and Landcare Research, as they're called then, got together to try and come up with a monitoring program with specific attributes that would address problems such as structural decline, nutrient and carbon depletion, biological activity change, nutrient saturation, soil acidity change, and contaminants within the soil. So they came up with what we refer to as the 500 Soils Monitoring Program, which Environment Canterbury still carries on with monitoring today. And we have 50 sites that we visit on a 9-year rotation. So this was set up between 1999 and 2001 and covers a whole range of landforms and land uses, climates throughout Canterbury. Currently, we're nearing the end of our 3rd sampling round. And we also have our more intensive, what we call the arable and pastoral program, where we have 265 sites. And this looks more at the intensive agriculture, like arable, dairy farming. These sites were set up between 2000 and 2007. And again, about 9 years between sampling events. And we've just finished our 3rd round of sampling. And when I say we, it's Plant and Food Research. They're the ones that do the contracting for us. They're here doing the hard yards. So here's just a map of where all our sites are currently located. And this is a fairly extensive list of the soil chemical, physical, and biological characteristics that we monitor in the soils. So I'm going to go through some results shortly, but I thought I'd get back to just back to the basics a little bit, just to remind you of a bit about soil. Soil aggregates. So soil aggregates are basically the building blocks of soil. They form our soil, and what we've got here in front of us is a soil aggregate, macro aggregate, and within it, you can see a mouse. Within it, the smaller round aggregates, they're micro aggregates. So they're made up of sand, silt, and clay, and organic matter. Doesn't show up very well on the screen, but surrounding those smaller within the macro aggregates are also pore spaces, and that's important for holding either water or oxygen, air, depending on the status of the soil. Around the outside, the green stringy bits, that's fungal hyphae, and also the red bits, organic matter. So, and within, all holding it together is sort of organic binding agents, sort of glues produced by organic matter, by organisms. So one of the things that we monitor is aggregate stability. So as I just said, aggregates are basically bundles of sand, silt, and clay held together by these microbial glues. And the measure of aggregate stability basically tells you the resistance of aggregates to basically falling apart. So why this is useful, it tells us the ability of the aggregates to withstand things like cultivation, heavy trafficking from like tractors or trucks driving on the soil, and also animal trampling, like big heavy cows, cattle beasts, and also things like rainfall impact. What will rain do to a soil? So basically, less stable aggregates, they're the ones that are most at risk. They're most likely to what we call disperse, so basically break down into finer particles. And if this happens on a cultivated soil, you may get a very hard layer on the surface, and this makes it difficult for seeds to germinate coming up through underneath, also for oxygen to get down into the soil, and also water from rain or irrigation to come down into the soil to infiltrate. So what this can mean, you can actually get runoff, so water can run off the surface. With that, you can carry sediment through erosion or even nutrient loss. So this is a bit of a visual demonstration of soil aggregate stability. So these are basically 3 jars filled with water. It doesn't show up all that well, but there's in each jar was a similar size clump of soil. And so on the far left, we've got what I'd call our sort of gold standard, our A grade soil. So it's had no cultivation for 25 years. On the far right, we've got conventional tillage. So this soil has been cultivated maybe a couple of times a year. And you can see that there's some of the particles starting to disperse through the water. So that's some of the aggregates starting to break down. And then finally, the one in the middle, it's what I'd call the maybe D grade soil. It's had a lot of passes from cultivation throughout the year. As you can see, most of the soil there from the clump after the 3-minute time period has actually gone into has been dispersed and is into solution. So you could imagine if you had a soil that's just been cultivated and you had a soil on the far left, the no-till compared to the soil in the middle. The soil in the middle is basically going to do what I said, cause some sort of a hard surface after rainfall or irrigation impact, leading to things like erosion, nutrient loss, etc. So some results. So this data I've got here is between 2013 and 2021. Yeah, again, it doesn't show up all that well. There's a lot of information there, but I'll talk you through it so you can make more sense of it. It's good, mate. It's a good idea to be able to see. A bit better. Okay, so at the top, the very, very top, shows up almost like a pinky white, is again, okay, it says below target range. So that's at the very top, just under data. And then to the right of that is a green box that says within target range. And to the right of that is above target range. So that's what the colours are in the boxes throughout the diagram. On the far left, there are these soil attributes that we measure. And the 5 columns to the right, on top of the first one, it says arable long term. So this is the land use of arable. It's been arable for greater than 6 years. And then the next one to the right is mixed. So this is both arable and pastoral. So it says recently arable underneath that, how good the eyesight is. And that basically means that when it was sampled, it was most recently in the arable stage. So this is less than 6 years of arable or pastoral. Then to the right again of that, it's the same, mixed again, but it was most recently pasture. So the one before was most recently arable, this is most recently pasture. And then the 2 columns on the far right are both sheep and beef and dairy pasture. So they're both long term, so they're greater than 6 years in pasture. So, there we go. So we'll take the first one at the top there, that's aggregate stability. It's quite hard to see, but on the far left, the arable, long-term arable, it shows 60% that's in green. So that means 60% of the sites that were monitored, were sampled, were within the target range. But that also means that 40%, the colour you can sort of see on the left of that, is not reaching target, so below the target. And if we move to the column to the right of it, the mixed recently arable, that's showing 70% that's reaching target, and again 30% that's not. So as we move along to the columns to the right, it's showing that there's more, there's greater aggregate stability the more you get towards the longer term pasture. So basically what that's telling us is that the more cultivation you have, the less aggregate stability you have in the soil. So this comes down to something called organic carbon. So when the soil is cultivated, organic carbon is broken down by soil microorganisms because you're introducing oxygen into the soil, and as the microbes go crazy and start degrading, start breaking down this organic matter. So this leads us on to the next slide, total organic carbon, another thing that we monitor in the monitoring program. So organic carbon comes from, as it says, inputs of plant matter, so animal additions like manures, and these are at different stages of decomposition. So this provides food and energy for the soil microorganisms. They do what's called mineralize these organic components, and as they do that, they release nutrients into the soil, which plants can take up, but also it means that it's readily to be leached through the soil. Now, even though it's less than 10% by weight, organic carbon is a very, very important part of soils, especially mineral soils. It basically, as I said, acts as a glue to hold these soil aggregates together, these soil components, and gives the soil strength. So if we go back to a big table, so total organic carbon, we can see again, if we go from the left column towards the right column, we've got less green on the left towards more green on the right. So more targets are met with the total organic carbon, the more time you have it in long-term pasture. And this is just what I've said. So organic matter is broken down with cultivation, and there's more additions when you come to long-term pasture. There's additions of manure, of pasture, breaking down additions like that. So if we look at the top box here, the photo, this is what I referred to before as an A grade, a gold standard soil. So this you can see well, it has a high organic carbon content. It's got a lot of roots, good distribution of aggregates. So your water is going to infiltrate through there. Oxygen is going to get through there. It's going to be easy for plant roots to grow through there. In comparison, you look at the bottom picture. This has low organic carbon, has very few roots, has very large clods, and these clods will likely break down when you have impact from like rainwater or like irrigation. And when that happens, the soil is also quite poor at holding nutrients or waste. It has very poor aeration and very poor water infiltration. So, lastly, what do we use this data for? Well, we use it in national state of environment reports. So all our data is collated, goes together with data from other regions throughout New Zealand, and then we can look at different regions and land use changes and see what comes out of that. The CRIs use our data for research into areas of interest or equally into areas of concern that we're worried about or they may be worried about. Cadmium, that's collected by the Cadmium Management Group. They monitor cadmium in soils throughout New Zealand. And we have also used quite a lot of the data in-house in our everyday work with technical questions regarding consent questions from consent planners. So, thank you very much. We got any questions?
Right, do we have any questions of clarification? Okay.
Yeah, I've got two. So my first question is, do we monitor pesticides and herbicides? Are we looking at the increasing concentrations or decreasing concentrations of those chemicals?
Yeah, thank you for your question. Not in this monitoring program. We don't measure residues like chemicals, herbicides, pesticides. I do know that that is measured in some surface water, groundwater quality monitoring, but no, not in our monitoring program.
Then also on the map, we've got a map in our paper that shows where various samples are taken, and it looks like there's a very limited amount of sampling happening in Waimakariri, and I just wondered why that is, because I would have thought there was similar types of farming practice happening there compared with Selwyn or Ashburton districts.
I'll pass it over to Zach. You can answer that one.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, if I may. When this program was set up in the late 90s, the issues at the time were all around intensive arable land uses. And of course, since then, as we know, we've seen quite a big change. So at the time, the more south bank of the Recreational was obviously there's a lot of concentration there. So the more arable uses were the focus at the time. But as we've seen, a big increase in dairying would change that distribution if we were to set that up today. So there's no deliberate attempt to exclude Waimakariri, and actually we are undertaking a process right now reviewing our spatial distribution of sites throughout the region and land uses. So that's work in progress, and by next calendar year we will have a report on that.
One more based on the table you showed. So I added up the numbers, and it looked like there were about 50 samples short compared with the 315 that are mentioned in the. Sorry, I'm a numbers geek, but that's quite a large proportion of the. So in the paper it talks about 315 tests, but the n equals numbers add up to about 50 less than 315. So yeah, just wondering what happened with those, because it's quite a big chunk.
Thank you for your question. Yes, I think we had a decrease in the. I'll go back maybe in the 500 soils. Yeah. See at the top there. We originally had 90 sites, but I think through some sites that were dropped for various reasons, there's a lot of land use change, and some sites went into the smaller hobby farms, I guess, and areas were not suitable anymore. Yeah, intensification of housing.
Councillor Karakia.
Thank you, Claire. Earlier on in the presentation, you articulated the importance of whenua, or as you call it, soils, to Māori. And in the paper, in our papers that you've got, engagement significance and Māori participation, was it you or was it your team or one of your team that worked with Kokorara Te Runanga on soil mapping, on that soil mapping project? And I'm just wondering what other, if any, runanga have actually, have you developed relations with, not only just on Te Pātako Rākai Hautu, the peninsula, but right across the 10 Papatipu runanga within the Ikan Takiwa? Because, for instance, at Rapaki, and I've heard it down in Arowhenua as well, is that there's more importance going into horticulture within the runanga. I'm just wondering if they're actually engaging with you, your team at Ikan.
Thank you for the question on that. We did reach out to runanga groups on the peninsula for. We've got a bit of an echo going on here.
Sorry, hang on, I'll turn mine off.
Thanks, Noel.
Okay. So a few years ago, there was some central government funding and also some funding from Manaaki Whenua, Landcare Research and Environment Canterbury, and we did reach out to runanga groups on the peninsula to see if they, if we could produce some more detailed land use soil mapping rather, and Kokorara took up the opportunity, and so we delivered some finer scale soil mapping for that takiwa. We're looking for opportunities for further soil monitoring work with runanga groups around Waitaha. So if there are opportunities, we'll certainly be keen to take them up. But the Mātauranga Māori space is something we're keen to support. So yeah, we're keen to take the opportunity if it arises.
Okay, thank you for that. Through the chair, so I think that one of the action points out of this presentation is that they possibly, there's a link between Te Rōputuia or, you know, however, but I would believe that there's a number of Papatipu runanga that don't know about this work, and they should know about it, because I'm sure that they will pick up now, you know, the opportunity to be involved with this.
Thank you, Councillor Karakia. Dr. Davey will just make a comment here as well.
Thank you, Chair. And I think the only thing I just wanted to note is that this is about soil quality mapping, and the reference that Zach gave before was about a bit more about the soil mapping itself of different soil types. We do tread a bit of a fine line here, because we're not an economic development agency, and we're not doing the work in order, you know, in the same way that a farmer or, you know, an agricultural developer would engage probably a CRI or a soil scientist if they wanted information around soils themselves. This is about more of a region-wide monitoring. So yes, very happy to work and acknowledge the link through to Papatipu runanga, and that's great. But we just have to be a little bit careful that, you know, how we're doing it and why we're doing it.
Thanks a lot. I think you should go back and read the Rōputuia agreement as first part of that, but you did one with Kokorara, and I know that it's actually, you're doing a kind of a holistic overview, but anything that, if you did it with Papatipu runanga Kokorara, surely, you know, you can do it with other runanga without actually having any kind of sensitivity about you not being a, you know, or us not being an economical kind of assistance or partner or whatever, however you did it. Anyway, just making the point.
I'll now go to councillor Sunkel and then we'll go to councillor Mackenzie.
Thank you for that. I just sort of looking across the graph from arable through to pastoralism, and we can draw some reasonable conclusions of a lot of green and grey or above in the dairy and the pastoral space. Is or are those conclusions being drawn regardless of soil classification? Because I farm on heavy soils at the bottom of the Selwyn catchment. We have pastoralism at the top of the catchment on those particularly lighter soils. So what conclusion can we draw, and I guess in the generic space of what we see of, apart from macro porosity, those numbers look quite good. And I thought some of at times, depending on soil classification or type, we might have seen some variation. Can we draw conclusions from that across the region with the knowledge we have?
Yeah, thank you for the question. That is a very good question. Off the top of my head, I can't give anything exact about which particular soil types, but I am aware that the heavier soils tend to have a higher organic carbon content, higher moisture content typically. So yeah, the organic matter is not targeted quite as much by the microorganisms. So I think in general there you tend to have higher organic carbon. But yeah, any further detail than that, yeah, I couldn't say off the top of my head.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I was a little bit concerned about the tone of this report, in that the purpose for the soil monitoring program was about structural decline and nutrient depletion and carbon depletion, and it seems to me that that's almost presupposing what the answers are going to be, and that you've assumed that soil is getting depleted across a variety of measurements, and then your conclusions, which is that analysis of the data shows that structural degradation remains a concern for lowland soils for both pastoral and arable land uses. And I've been involved in managing soil for my professional life, trained as a soil scientist at university, and have been heavily involved with sustainable land use practices across the Canterbury Plains. In fact, most of the areas where your sampling is taking place. And yesterday and this morning, I rang a number of colleagues involved in the industries to check their views as to whether soil is degrading or getting better. And without exception, they all agreed that soil is actually improving in quality rather than degrading. So I guess and having looked at that chart, which is only given
Question of clarity, please.
and I looked at the chart, which is a snapshot rather than showing trends. And again, there's nothing up there that looks particularly alarming, depending on what where your parameters are in terms of what's good and what's bad. And I also look at the trends in terms of yield and production from a lot of the areas where you're doing the soil sampling, which tends to suggest there isn't a major issue with the quality of soil. So I guess my question really is why are the results of your monitoring suggesting that we have a major problem, when in fact out in the provinces people would say we don't think we have a problem. And I note with specific reference to wind erosion that we've just had at least 2 significant wind events in this last week, and there's a lot of dust blowing down the rivers. But in fact, Bar Hill, which traditionally blew in the 60s and 70s when I was a young fellow, didn't blow. So it suggests that we don't have a major problem. Comment on some of that.
Okay, there's if I may answer that one through the chair. There are a few things to mention there. Point 19 in the paper has three sub-bulletins there, which came from the Our Land National Report. So macro porosity across New Zealand was below the target range for selected land uses between 2014 to 2018. increasing Olsen phosphorus levels and cropping and dry stock sites are indicative of excessive fertilizer use. And there was an irrigated pasture having significantly less soil and nitrogen than non-irrigated pastures. So that's all come out of national level reporting from our land. So I'm not clear if are those being challenged?
Yeah, absolutely. And if you just take the Olsen peas for an example, I think I'm not sure what rate, what the current standing is of A-grade audit passes now for good management practice. But that's one of the requirements, is to make sure that you're not applying excessive amounts of phosphate. So if that was ever true, I suspect it, and it was true in the dairy industries in the late 90s, I think excessive amounts of phosphate were accumulating in soils. But I think to a large extent that's been rectified. And the FEP process is actually part of that process to make sure that farmers aren't applying excessive amounts of Olsen P. When it comes to the macro porosity, that's pugging. I mean, that's a temporary issue on most farms. If you have a pugging issue, you renovate your soils and you put them back into pasture so that they recover. And
so, yeah, can we just in this section, that question
just yeah, all right. But I guess I am challenging those reports. I'm certainly challenging the New Zealand study that shows irrigated pastures have less soil carbon and nitrogen. That doesn't stand up by any of the information we've got from the change in land use types, especially on the Lismore soils across Canterbury under irrigated pasture. And so I guess if those are the premises under which we're working, I'd like to know. And one last question: what is the cost of this program?
I can answer that in terms of the cost. The contract for running the soil quality program is $150,000 a year. And just noting that it's a revolving program that after 9 years you've been through a cycle, so it takes a while for it to work its way through, which is the most cost-effective way that we could run the program.
Okay, is there any further questions of clarity of speakers? Dion, Councillor Swiggs.
Yeah, I'm actually quite interested in this this data from a personal point of view actually as well. But I was reading through the 1999 to 2013 study. Is there an update study that is available that was based on that, or is this what this is, or is there? I was just wondering because I'd like to read that personally.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Short answer, no, there's not another report yet for the entire data set. We do have a preliminary that was done just beginning of this year at the 500 soils level, but that's just a preliminary. As I had said in the presentation, we have been through just about 3 rounds with the 500 soils and 3 rounds with the arable and pastoral program. And so basically you're looking for points on a graph. The more points you have, the better idea you have of trends. So if you have, after 2 rounds, if you have 2 points on a graph, you may get but then you don't know if that trend is going up or trend is going down. So basically now we've got to the end of these three rounds. We'll be looking within the next year of doing a full comprehensive analysis of both data sets.
We will now have Councillor Robinson and Councillor Ward then. Thank you.
Thank you. I've just got a question regarding the data for cadmium. It says it's within range 100%, but I don't have any data to go by for that. Do you have more accurate data available to show, comparison to other parts of the country and the likes? And the second part of that question is with regards to the pesticides and herbicides that Councillor Southworth mentioned before. I think it would be, my opinion, I think it should be also monitored within the soil, not just the surface water and the likes, because it it has a half-life of, 3 to 6 months. And I think based on what the EU is going through at the moment and pretty much not renewing its use, I think we need to really look at the data, what it looks like in the soil before it gets to surface water. So yeah, with regards to the cadmium, do you have data on that, please? And what level it's at? Thank you.
We have, thank you for the question. We have the data from our own monitoring program. We don't have ourselves data from other regions, but that's of course the cadmium monitoring program, national level. They obviously have the data, so it's available, and more than happy to get that together for you if that would be of interest. That's good. In terms of herbicides and pesticides, yeah, that is a good question. I wouldn't call myself an expert on their half-life, their time in the soil. We visit these sites every 9 years. Whether you would get a representative sampling or result from that period would be, I guess, dependent on when the pesticides or herbicides were applied and their breakdown. I mean, it's possible we can do that. I guess it does, of course, come down to the finances.
For clarity.
Just with regards to the monitoring program, it was developed in the late 1990s, and I'm wondering, considering maybe new things are identified, has that monitoring program changed at all in scope during that period, because it is quite a long time ago? Thank you.
Yes, thanks for that. We have had, as we've said in the paper, Professor Keith Cameron review the monitoring programs, and he concluded they were fit for purpose, and he was very happy with that. But your point about what we monitor, I think, is a good one. We're currently asking Manaaki Whenua to report back on soil biological indicators, which is what we touched on briefly in the paper. And there's a growing interest around Aotearoa and worldwide about more holistic views of measuring soil health. So this is a real hot topic nationally, and we've asked Manaaki Whenua to provide some advice for us on that. And like we touched on before when we talked about the Waimakariri soil sampling question, we are reviewing not only what we do in terms of the metrics, but the spatial distribution, the land uses across landforms and climate zones, particularly in the climate change context as well. So we are in the process of reviewing that, and by the end of this calendar year, we will have some advice on that as well.
Sorry, I pinched us.
Yeah, if I could just quickly add, up on the table there, things like some of the heavy metals. I can't remember specifically which ones that we've picked up recently, but I think it might be fluoride, and some of the other heavy metals we've just picked up recently as additions based on, like Zach had just said from Keith Cameron's report, the cold and hot water extractable carbon. This has also just been picked up. This tends to be a good way to measure sort of labile the readily broken down organic carbon content in the soil. Also a good measure of what we'd call mineralizable nitrogen, so nitrogen that will become available to plants throughout the year based on soil organisms breaking down organic carbon. So yeah, it's definitely it's always a work in progress as science comes up with new ideas or new research on better techniques. As I say, the anaerobically mineralizable nitrogen, that's an older version of the hot water extractable carbon, so nitrogen rather. So they are sort of replacing one another as research shows improvements.
I'm just conscious of time, and we've got another paper that people are very interested in. But Councillor Robinson's just touched on something that perhaps the co-chairs or chairs, Jan and I, can actually talk to staff around, perhaps some information coming back to the team around the pesticides, herbicides, and the work that's done nationally around that. Thank you. Got Councillor Ward.
Just carrying on from where Ian left off, I mean, I've always been very, very passionate about soils as well, and a lot of farmers in the last 10 years in Canterbury that I know have got very involved in the precision ag space. I mean, do you realise that? And a lot of them, testing every hectare every 2 or 3 years and coming up, got a huge data set of, fertility levels, and through this information, they've been able to cut their fertiliser use by 20 to 30%. So I think, what I'm trying to guess is, are you aware of this, and do we need to capitalise on this, because all that information is there?
Thank you for the question. Yes, it is always, I guess, a balance between monitoring program. We're looking specifically at soil quality, and also where you're looking at sort of production, what you can get as you say, precision agriculture becomes a much better sort of target for applications of nutrients, of pesticides, herbicides, much better production, but we don't specifically measure production, so it's hard to relate the two together in our specific program that we have. I mean, completely aware of the research that other institutes do, Foundation for Arable Research, Plant and Food Research, the work that they do in monitoring and research to do with that. So it definitely doesn't slip by the wayside. We know that even though we maybe painted not such a pretty picture of how soil structure is looking in some cases, we know there's been a lot of improvements in other cases. It just doesn't always fit specifically into what our monitoring program would show as a result.
Thank you. I think that I will say thank you to you, Zach and Matt, for the conversation around this. I think what it has highlighted is that this is a monitoring program, and these are the results you're getting from the monitoring, but it's how it actually, what it means on the ground for lots of people, and what we're actually seeing. And I think as one of the councillors raised with, we've got to make it appropriate too for the time, so we sort of do need to move. But look, I'll thank you and ask you to leave the table, and we'll put this motion, and then we'll just open it for some discussion. So we have the motion, some recommendations coming up here on the screen. And I'm not going to read them all because that's quite long-winded, but you've all got them on page 25 of your agenda. So can we have a mover for that? Councillor Spriggs, a seconder. Councillor Sunkel, thank you. So now I think there is probably an appetite for a little bit of discussion or conversation here. So Councillor Southwest.
Thank you. So yeah, I've just done a quick Google, and I love Google. Anyway, there's a 2018 national survey of pesticides and emerging organic contaminants in groundwater, which was done by ESR, and it looks like of the samples, as this is in groundwater, and of the samples that were tested within Canterbury's boundaries, looks like roughly half showed up pesticides in the groundwater. So to me, that is absolutely an argument to suggest we should be looking at what concentrations are in soils and if they're building. Just looking through the data for Environment Canterbury's area, one pesticide in particular keeps cropping up, which is terbuthalazine, which is a current still in use pesticide. There is DDT and other things which are, I know, are historic. There is quite some number of years as these things break down. There's multiple things that pesticides break down into, and those can continue to have concerns around health risk, around water, impacts on aquatic life, and so on and so forth. So I would like to suggest adding an additional proposal into the recommendations here, building what the chair of this committee, deputy chair of this committee, Councillor Claire Mackay, just mentioned, that asking staff to look at that. But I think we should actually put that into a recommendation that we ask staff to investigate a monitoring program for pesticides and herbicides. Whether that's enough in itself at that high level, or whether we want to say, something specific about it. But we do have a level of service around emerging contaminants as well. So, and I've never been very clear about specifically what we do in terms of that, methodical, because this is great. This is a methodical, long-term, provides really useful, well, possibly not such useful information. Maybe we should be shifting towards more things like pesticides and emerging contaminants, rather than the soil data, which the farmers around our table don't feel is as relevant or useful to them.
I wonder then whether it's worth, if I may, suggest that we actually have an update at the next meeting on what we do in that area and what nationally is done, and then perhaps move after that. Then we could look at what our options may be. I think that's probably a more appropriate way to go. Somebody who's commenting here. So,
sorry, Claire.
Chair Scott would like to actually make a comment, and then we'll come to you if we may.
This is a statutory requirement for us to do this piece of work, and I think actually adding to it in terms of the recommendation is not the right thing to do here. I'm not suggesting that we don't do that, but I don't think it's the right thing to do here. It will change the cost of this, and it will push it wider. This is a 9-year plan. If you're talking about atrazine, which you obviously were before, then that's more. Excuse me.
No, I mentioned tobutylazine, but there is atrazine in here as well.
Yeah, well, if you're talking about that, then that would close the field down quite a bit in terms of the areas that you would have to look at. And I think having a wide range of areas across dairying and sheep and beef, you're probably looking in those areas and you're not going to find anything. But the areas that you need to look at are the cropping areas, probably, if we want to do that. So I think we leave this where it is, and we get some advice from science about what we need to do if we need to do it, because it has LTP considerations also.
Exactly, and that's why it's important to look at it sooner than later if we can, because it is something that I think has been a question raised in the last term as well.
So do you agree, Councillor Southworth, that this may not be the right place to put that recommendation in?
I think it could be tacked on there as a addition, because we're talking about soil and that pesticides and herbicides concentrations in soil in a long-term monitoring program totally aligns with this. To me, it feels like a gap.
And can we actually just find out a bit more information before we do that? So could we take that as an action?
All I'm trying to do is make sure it's locked in, that we get that information back. And I'm hearing from Councillor Kai that can be done.
I'm just checking with our director that can be done.
Yes, look, we could bring back to the next meeting a report on what is done. It's quite a short turnaround until the next meeting to go into sort of detailed costings or, what extra or something like that. But we can have an attempt, and
so we can note. We'll note that if we may in the minutes. Thank you. Okay, thanks. Councillor Karakia.
Sorry, I was waiting on you. I think you had a delay. Hey, I was just picking up on what Vicky was saying, because again, coming back to Papatipu Runanga, and particularly those with streams, coastal, it was actually also one of the issues was about soil leaching. And particularly when the lands around a number of the Papatipu Runanga are not used by them, they're usually leased out to farmers, etc. And what they're worried about now, and some of the water testing they've done, is leaching soils. And so I thought that was what Vicky was talking about would actually kind of fit into that. I understand, the timing, the cost factor, and all of that as well. I thought it was quite a good recommendation because it actually addresses some of the concerns around soil leaching, on the Papatipu. The other thing, just to clarify that word horticulture amongst Māori, is that it's not actually totally a word that we use, for commercial reasons. Changing to horticulture actually is about feeding the people within the, within the takiwā. And we don't sell it to them, we koha it. This is what's happening with the Maita Gardens actually at Rapaki, for instance. So all of that kind of investigation into soil to help that practice would be advantageous. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor McKenzie.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. I'm really concerned about this program. And on the face of it, it all sounds quite plausible, but it seems to me that the answer to Nick's question about the results that this monitoring program is showing up, which doesn't coincide with what is probably recognised on the ground. So, to be colloquial, it doesn't pass the sniff test in terms of reading this paper and the conclusions and the purpose of what they're trying to achieve. It doesn't pass a sniff test when it comes to what's actually going on the ground out in the region. And so I'm really struggling to wonder why we're justifying running this program in the first place. Now, except that there may be some statutory obligations to do some soil monitoring. And I accept that there may be some inclination to morph the program into studying chemical residues and various other things which are not strictly to do with soil monitoring. But as a soil monitoring program, it looks at a step with what's actually happening in the land, and if a report comes from ECAN saying that the soil across Canterbury, the intensively farmed parts of Canterbury, are degraded, which seems to be the conclusion, most people who are involved with intensive farming would roll their eyes and say, that doesn't make sense to me. And I think we need to think about that.
Thank you. I think just to note that this program is funded in the current year it's actually in, and I guess as part of a long-term plan discussion that could be brought back onto the table at that time.
So, are you open to an amendment to the third recommendation?
As in just putting it as in. My understanding is, and I'll just check, that this would be reviewed as part of the long-term plan. Can we just adjourn for 2 minutes, please? Okay, we'll come back into the meeting here. We're all online. We're right? Yep, okay. Thank you. We've had a proposal from Councillor McKenzie that we make an amendment to 3, or that he proposes an amendment to 3, which is adding after basis with the expectation that this will be part of long-term plan discussions.
Until the expenditure can be reviewed in the long-term plan. And after, in the earlier part of the no expectation, take out with the expectation, and that the recommendation that staff continue to work on the soil quality monitoring program in the interim, and it's until this expenditure can be reviewed in the LTP.
Okay, we have an amendment here put by Councillor McKenzie.
Yes, if I may, just very briefly, because I've already outlined most of my concerns. But I guess my main concerns are that this program is throwing up results that seem to be at odds with what is conventionally agreed as the state of our soil health across the region. And it's noting that the soil monitoring program is pretty much focused on the Canterbury Plains. And I note that the information used from this monitoring program is used for consenting purposes, and that would seem to be, if the information or the conclusions from the monitoring program are at odds with what is actually happening, then that would be a dangerous precedent. And so I think it's fair to say that the soils across Canterbury, especially in the on the plains, are actually in a much better state of health now than they've ever been. And if this monitoring program isn't showing those results, then I question the conclusions from the information that we're getting, and therefore the monitoring program itself.
Chair would, as seconder, Councillor Rees, would you like to speak now? No, okay, thank you. So, yes, we'll open it up for discussion now. Chair Scott.
Look, while I'm not violently opposed to this, because I don't think it changes things all that much, I would question why we want to alter something that's that we have some statutory responsibility to do in terms of commenting on or reporting on the soil health that we have in our region. And myself on this, the short term that we've been doing this, and it is a short term thing, and farming systems are changing very, very quickly. I remember when I started in the arable sector, we ploughed all this stuff. You know, that's what we did. You hardly see ploughs working now, so that has an effect on soil carbon. So farming systems are changing. The other thing is, I thought the report was good. Actually, I thought it showed that that Canterbury's changed. Councillor McKenzie is right on a lot of levels, especially about the dust. You know, if you can remember the 60s in Canterbury when it blew northwest, you couldn't see where you're going down the main road if you're heading to South Canterbury. And so I'm just questioning the intention, and while I wouldn't question your ability to make the statements you have, Councillor McKenzie, they are your statements that we're swinging on here. So therefore, I just want to know where the intent is here.
Swigs.
I can sympathise with what Councillor McKenzie is saying, but I won't support his amendment there because, like Chair Scott said, I actually thought the data was good. I read through the report from 2014 as well because I'm quite interested in this for my my PhD that I'm doing at the moment. And data is data. The interpretation of how you get data is a different story. And I think, you know, when you actually look at the 2014 report, there's a lot of data there. And I think if we sort of start meddling with that, we're going to lose that continuity of the past data that's already there. So we don't get good conclusions of moving forward. But it does lead me to the question, and I think what, you know, and it has been talked about here a little bit, is that whose data do you trust? And I think there's a lot of questions out that I hear in the communities about whose data do you trust, and how can we sort of integrate better processes of trusting data that's collected on farms and collected from people and integrate that into our systems and vice versa. And I think that's a larger question that probably needs to be talked about because there are opportunities in that space. I'd love to explore those opportunities, but I do not think this is the way to do it. And I'm worried that this, you know, if we pass this amendment, it opens a door to cutting something that actually does have long-term benefit, but it's about the interpretation in my view.
Councillor Southworth.
Yeah, I mean, this is decades of data from the 1990s now. It's a couple of decades of data going into the, like, it seems odd to me if anecdotally there's a difference between what our data is measuring and showing and what people feel about their land and the soil. It seems to me there's another piece of investigation to do there, not let's stop doing the science and collecting our data. And I think I totally agree with Councillor Swiggs. There's a risk if you have a long-term program and then you decide to cut it. You can't just jump back in again. It's very difficult, and that continuity is really important. So, but yeah, I do wonder if there's a further piece of research to do to understand why is there such difference between what people believe and what our data says. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Sankel.
Thank you. And again, I do have sympathy with the challenges that the report puts out. But I look at those items 19 in particular in the report, and I heard mutterings around me that we don't agree with our land outcomes that we've put there. And for me, if we don't agree with our land, which is a national purview of what's happening, then I believe we should be actually upping our understanding and research within a regional context if we actually disagree with it to get the answers. So I am challenged there. And I'm aware of the presentation we had from, I forget his name, from Lincoln University on soil not so long ago, looking at the research station in Ashburton and the challenges they were getting around carbon and irrigation and what we might expect to be seeing versus what was being seen, which again is driving further research to actually understand. So while I understand the intent, I am also well aware, as Councillor Sweeks and others have said, the changes in farm system around Olsen and a whole bunch of things. So for me, I would like to see the ongoing research, which I guess better clarifies what we've got within our region, which can then better inform our national prerogative.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, I will put this amendment that we've got here on the floor, which is moved by Councillor Mackenzie and seconded by Councillor East. All in favour? Maybe we just have a show of hands to count here. All in favour? We've got 4 in favour there, so we've got more than that at the table that will be against. 5, 6, 7. Thank you. That noted, Ian? Thank you. Yes. Is there any other no's?
Yes, I am.
Councillor Karakia, you're a no?
Yes.
I'm also a no. Did that come through?
We're on to the original recommendations, and you're a no to that, Paul?
That's correct. Are we talking about the amendment? That was
Call a division on.
I thought we were talking about the amendment.
Sorry, we had gone past that, but I think it's probably fair for us just to actually go back and get a division on that, given that I hadn't picked up your no or Paul's no.
That was to the amendment.
yes, same here.
Oliver or Deborah's going to call the names. So we're discussing your position around the amendment, which was that staff continue to work on the soil quality monitoring program in the interim, noting the progress updates will be provided to council or at an appropriate committee meeting of council on an ongoing basis until this expenditure can be reviewed in the long term. So that's what we're voting on. We want to know whether yes, you support it, or no, you don't, and we'll be calling names.
The names will be called in random order. Councillor Mackay. Councillor Davis.
Against.
Councillor Mackenzie. Councillor Robinson. Councillor Fullen. Councillor Southwest.
Against.
Councillor East.
Yes.
Councillor Ward.
Yes.
Councillor Swiggs. Councillor Kodako.
Against.
Councillor Scott. Councillor Sunkel.
Against.
Councillor Burns.
Against.
Councillor Deche.
Against.
Okay, we have 9 against and 5 for, so the amendment is lost. So we'll now go back to the original recommendations that were moved by Councillor Swiggs and Councillor Sunkel. All those in favour say aye. Against?
Kia ora koutou, and thank you very much for the opportunity to bring this paper to you, councillors, which I will take as read. And just with one clarification on the point number 1 in our purpose, I'm sorry, there's a typo error where the second line states to provide assurance that soil quality, apologies, it should read contact recreation in Canterbury is being monitored as part of the State of the Environment programme. So, having taken the paper as read, if there's any further questions from any of our councillors on this, would be good. Thank you.
Right. We're into questions, given that everybody has read this paper, so.
Yeah, bear with me. Yeah, because I've got a few, and so I'll just go through one by one. So the first one is, given that there's an increase in popularity of outdoor swimming outside of what we might traditionally think of as the swimming season, should we be considering extending that monitoring program beyond that quite narrow window? And could there be an additional benefit in that? I know we're looking to try and develop some models that can help us to predict what we're expecting, so that data could actually have a wider benefit, or could it? My first question.
Thank you, Councillor Statworth. Well, in the guidelines, the 2003 MFE MOH guidelines for swimming water quality, they specify the season that we are to monitor in, as you say, that November to March. And that's what we do under the current system. But we also monitor the state of the environment sites monthly basis, which covers all of the rec sites. So monthly monitoring happens at all of those for E. coli. And in relation to the model, this past winter, the team have collected some additional samples for feeding into the model. And based on the outputs of that, we would then look at our monitoring plan. Thank you.
On page, or as part of the bullets in point 15 on the freshwater grade, so page 32, 33, top of page 33, it talks about some of the sites like Karakia, River Gorge, the Opihi, in the Opihi River. There's areas where there has been improvements. Do we understand what it is that's improved those? Is it something specific that we've done that we can learn from for other areas, or is it just at the moment it's more sort of just data analysis and stats?
Do you want me? Would you like me to? Yes, through you, Chair. Yeah, look, those sites, water quality is quite variable year to year, and there are often those climatic drivers. So it's always encouraging when we've got a number of sites that have improved in grade, and obviously all of the work that we do throughout the region with our landowners help contribute to reduce the risk of fecal contamination. But often it's more of a climatic factor that's driving these sites that are kind of sometimes they're sitting around that swimmable, unswimmable, and they flip in and out. So yeah. In terms of, so point 22, paragraph 22 talks about the work we're doing with Christchurch City Council supporting improvements to the Whakaropo Harbour. And do we have any update and any specifics? So I know, for example, there was a breakage found in Corsair Bay that's been fixed. Have we found anything? Is there anything more specific that's been found, that's been fixed? We'll get a little update on progress.
Not that I'm aware of at the moment, but I know they are continuing to look at each of those catchments and see what they can do to help mitigate fecal pollution entering the harbours. No.
So then in the communications part, we've got paragraph 36 talks about a campaign in Whakaropo, Littleton Harbour, and that we've been giving out leaflets and information. And I know there's been a couple of community events now as well. Any feedback on that? How's that going?
They've been going well. We've spoken to a really large range of people. So we've been to Littleton Market so far, and the Governor's Bay Fete with Autumn Bradley Park Fair again this weekend. On the whole, people are really interested. Quite a few questions about septic tanks and the interactions that they could have, and we have some good information on hand for people on that as well. So overall, some frustrated voices, occasional frustrated voices, but on the whole, people are very interested and want to know how they can help improve the water quality.
And then it's probably one for Tafflin, but on the Lawa site, I had a quick look, and it looks like it feels easier to find what I want to find on there, I think. So when you have the not recommended for swimming, but you want to see a bit more about the data and what reason behind it, it feels easier to find. But in terms of the aspects around safety for swimming in terms of tides or currents and that sort of thing, it's quite generic. And I just wonder, is this, do we know if there's anything happening in terms of improving that aspect of information on the LAO website. I know it's not something specific to Environment Canterbury, but it does feel quite high level generic.
I think
Karakia, if I could actually pass that to Dr. Davey, if that's okay, as he represents us on the LAO space.
Yes, through you, Chair, I'm happy to answer that. I'm pleased to hear that you're finding it easier to navigate around LAO. I can report that nothing has changed, so you've obviously just got better at it, which is good. In terms of the other information, and there's a swell, I'm doing it off the top of my head, I think there's swell is put on there. That's a live feed that's taken from, I can't exactly remember where it comes from, but it is a prediction for that site. It's not a sort of a generic for New Zealand. It is certainly for the close area. It is one of the things that we have looked at around what other information could be supplied, and it's really a case of how do we get those data and can we display them. I think it's a bit of a difficult issue in a way, but we certainly have tried to make it so that it's not just so for example, on our freshwater sites there is a linkage through so you can look at the flows and things as well, so it's not just the microbial that's presented.
okay. Can I come back to you if you've got some more? Councillor East, and then we'll go to Councillor Karakia.
Thank you. Many years ago, I started a water quality testing program with the then catchment board, where we were testing in a range of sites for E. coli and dissolved oxygen, principally. So I'm interested whether any of those old catchment board sites are still part of your sampling program, and or what's the sort of longest data you have for, well, particularly E. coli then, for any particular site that you are sampling. In other words, are you going back into some of the old catchment board sites, or is it a completely new program now?
For the recreational monitoring program, the summertime seasonal program, that's been running for about 20 years since the update to the Ministry of Health, Ministry for the Environment Guidelines in 2003. Prior to that, we used a different indicator, fecal coliforms. We have, and it would have been through those catchment board days. We do have data for some of our river sites that probably go back to the mid-70s is when I've seen some of our earliest data sit in our database. I'm not sure if that was around the time that program started. That would be less frequent, part of kind of monthly or even 4 times a year type sampling. So that data is there, but the difference in frequency and often different sites means it's not that useful for enabling any long-term comparison. But the 20-year record is pretty valuable because it's been consistent in the methodology.
And secondary question then, particularly in some of the harbour and peninsula sites, do we maintain any record of what the weather conditions may have been in the week prior to a testing, and what influence they may have on an outcome? And secondly, tidal variances in sampling as well. So just wanting to know really whether we do take any cognizance in the weather patterns and just things that may have influenced a result prior to our sampling.
Through you, Chair, yes, we do, is the short answer. We have our staff, when they're monitoring, take note of anything they see in the environment and the weather conditions, whether it's raining, cloudy, things like that. But in our data, we also link it to rainfall that has happened in the last 24, 48, 72 hours. And in relation to the tidal conditions, the sampling occurs at the same, approximately the same tidal condition each time. which is 1 hour either side of high tide. So that is consistent through our record, and also we would have the records of the tides, and if there was significant spring tide or something like that would be taken into consideration when reviewing the data.
Okay, we're still on questions of clarity at the moment, so we'll go to Councillor Karakia and then Councillor McKenzie.
So these are questions around clarity. Is that what we're saying, Claire?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, you just clarify again? I think it might have been the first speaker, and there was a comment around the engagement with the community, that it's feeling more positive. Was that correct?
Yes.
Who are you talking to? I mean, because hell, you come down, I mean, this is a hot potato down at Rapaki, and it has been for quite some time. And I don't know whether you've actually, you've tracked who you're actually talking to. So you're in the Littleton market, and most of the Littleton market actually people that come from outside of Littleton who frequent that. But I suppose you qualified them. The other part of it, I don't get that, because a lot of people that we talk to are really frustrated with this. And now what's just come out over the last few days is actually, alerting us to the type of signage they're actually going to put up around, contaminated beaches. You can't swim there, you can't take kaimoana. So that's actually started the whole thing going again. So I'm really surprised that you're actually getting some kind of positive results by engaging with the community around this.
I think it might be worth having a conversation just to understand what is going on with Joe. I think it is Joe Taylor is who you're talking to here. Sorry, I'm disappearing for some. Joe's wanting to take the floor again, but just to understand actually what has been done and what could be helpful by working together in a collaborative process. So, Joe, do you want to just add anything to that around the clarity side of it, or anybody?
Thank you for the question, through you, Chair. Sorry, I was a bit eager with my button pushing. Yeah, I hear what you're saying, and there's definitely a lot of opinions and a lot of questions about why things are the way they are, why signs say the things they do, and why long-term grades are the way they are. And what we find is when we have the opportunity to talk to people one-on-one and grow their understanding, talking to our scientists and in some cases talking to our health representatives that are there from Te Mana Ora, it makes a really big difference, and people come to understand why we are needing to do things the way we are. Not everything can be determined by the community. Some things must be determined by health guidelines and regulations and the decisions made by the health authority. So some frustrations around signage may be to do with that, but I won't speak any further to that because that's not my area.
Thank you. We're now.
Sorry, Claire, can I just comment on that?
Yes, you may.
Just a quick comment. I mean, look, what's actually being what the frustration is that, believe it or not, local people know what the situation is. Why it's happened, and they can't understand that. Why don't they go to the crux of the matter, which is actually infrastructure needing repair. There's an overpopulated Governor's Bay that's got a sewer system that actually doesn't, it's not fit for purpose anymore. And they find it difficult that we know the inherent problems, the underlying problems, what's causing a lot of this, and yet we continue to be monitoring things and all that, whereas at the end of the day, understanding the real problems, that's what frustrates people, because they know exactly what the problems are, and yet we get all this sort of data, monitoring, all of that. So I heard the frustration at a meeting at Rapaki last week, and people have just had enough of it. And so, yeah, data collection, all of that, how you use it. But at the end of the day, the crux of the matter is actually been there for quite some time.
Thank you, Councillor Karakia. We'll go to Councillor McKenzie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And this might be a unfair question because it's going into quite a lot of detail, but in terms of the Recreational Gorge testing, do you test on the north side or the south side, above the bridge or below the bridge, do you know? And I guess, and so don't answer that, but when you do your testing, do you always test from the same spot?
Through you, I'll come back and give you the details of where that site is. I can't tell you off the top of my head. As much as practical, we always test at the same site. Yes.
Councillor Pauling.
Got it. Yeah, just highlighting what Councillor Karakia said, and I mean Councillor Southworth as well has noted that yeah, this is, especially with Whakaraupō, the results are disappointing, and it's hard for people to comprehend that they maybe can't swim in those places that they've been swimming for a long time. So have sympathy for that, and I'm really keen on the solutions too, and working, and I note point 22, like Councillor Southworth has raised, and keen for us to potentially be updated a bit more regularly on what is happening, because we are coming into summer and we are going to get the community being upset with us when they either realise if they haven't already. I know the comms has already started on our website, etc., and then that's happening. But I'd just be keen for councillors to be updated a bit more regularly about what's happening with the city council work. So just putting that out as a note, maybe to ask for that. And my other question is, I've had a look on the LAWA website too, and it's really good. When the data starts coming in for this next season, how does it come up straight away? Like every time we go out and monitor, does it come up on the website? It does. Cool. Thank you. That's awesome to know. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Diche.
Kia ora. Following on from exactly what Councillor Karakia had said, I'm on the Banks Peninsula Water Zone Management Committee, and there is a lot of frustration in the community about this, and people are quite disappointed and upset, and really, it's exactly what he said. They're really wanting results, not necessarily just to be told that it's still not fixed. And I know that's not an easy fix by any means, but we keep going round and round with this. So yeah, I don't think the community is really feeling that it's getting better. That's the feedback that I've gotten.
There's no further questions of clarity from the table. I'll thank Shirley and Elaine and Joe for coming and presenting, and ask you to step back. Thank you. Now we have some recommendations and a new staff recommendation, which I'll get put up. So here's the new staff recommendation. Essentially, point 2 is the one that's changed, which actually picks up what the next steps are, consistent with the next steps that were listed in the paper, which were points 38 to 41. So if people just want a minute just to read those. Make sure you.
I'm happy to move, Chair. Yep.
I'm probably a bit late to the table here, but I was looking at the 2.4 and the work with the Christchurch City Council. I'd be really keen to get urban rivers on there as a means of recreational activity, because there's waka, there's kayakers over summer, and I just would like to have something on there at least so that Christchurch City Council can come back to us with a bit more detail on the urban river situation.
Might just ask my director, they're not done as part of the contact recreation at the moment, are they?
Yes, they are part of the contact recreation program. So it's, yes, they are. But
so they're already included, as I understand. I think that we've got 2 more papers to go with the approval of the council table. Instead of trying to shorten everything up, I think it's probably important that we break now and come back at 1 o'clock. So hopefully that suits everybody. Okay. So meeting adjourned until 1 o'clock. Okay, I think we'll at this point in time reconvene, and we've got everybody in the room that we need to have in the room for the agenda item 8.4. So we've got Fiona Miles, she's Principal Strategy Advisor, leading this. We've got Judith Elgalay, who's online. Judith, yes, thank you for coming on. Regulatory Services General Manager. We've got we've got Leonie in the room, but we're joined at the table there by Sarah Heddle, who's the Principal Implementation Advisor, and we've got Rob Earl, the Resource Management Officer of Implementation, sitting there at the table. So I'll hand over to you, Fiona, or is Judith going to lead us? Whoever's going to lead this.
Tēnā koutou katoa. I'll just do a little short introduction. Thanks for identifying the people in the room to answer any technical related questions. As you'll be aware, we've brought several papers through this committee over the past sort of 18 months around the implementation of the national regs and the essential freshwater package 2020. So this is just a little bit of an update on that, and in particular around some aspects of the freshwater farm plans. But I'll leave Fiona to draw out a couple of key points, but obviously taking the paper as read in its substantive nature. Thanks.
Kia ora koutou, thank you for letting us bring this update paper to you. So as Jude said, this is an update on implementation progress of 3 pieces of regulation that came through the essential freshwater package. So they're intended to deliver improved freshwater outcomes. So you've got an update on the synthetic nitrogen fertiliser, or the NCAP, intensive winter grazing program. These are both part of the National Environmental Standard for Freshwater, and this is the 2nd year of those programs. So this is a subsequent update on earlier ones. Slightly different for the Freshwater Farm Plan program. Although it was signalled as part of Essential Freshwater in 2020, the regulations were only gazetted in June of this year. So it's more an update on the implementation planning of the program. Noting that we have the rollout of the regulations scheduled for the 1st of July 2025, and that is subject to the new government when it's formed during the Order in Council process. Also just note that there will be costs associated with the implementation of the Freshwater Farm Plan program, and they will be considered as part of the long-term plan discussions. And as the program progresses, further updates will be brought to Council. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you. I'm just getting some correct details here. Sorry, Leonie, I was very remiss in not acknowledging you at the table too. Leonie Fitchi, Regional Lead Implementation, sitting there at the table for those of you who aren't aware who's who here. So we'll now go to questions of clarity. I think the paper is quite detailed, and I know there are some interest. So we've got Councillor Swiggs.
Hello. Hello, how are you? Sorry. I'm trying to get my voice out. So the updates, obviously there's great progress in the NCAP, or the nitrogen, but there's a bit of it seems there's a little bit of room, obviously, for the reporting. There's a bit of, it says there's a bit of room for improvement. What's the main barriers that you're seeing out there for farmers to report this, obviously, report their work?
Yeah, kia ora. The last year when the reporting first started, so that was for the previous season, there was a bit of a time lapse between the tool supposed to become like the online reporting tool coming online and then it actually coming online, which pushed us back last year. And then this year, I think it's been a bit more of a struggle to get the momentum for people to then actually report using it, because it was kind of almost lost in that momentum in the first year. The other thing that we've found when we spoke to a lot of the rural community through different engagement times was the complexity around multiple reporting to different tools, different entities, and a lot of people thought that they had reported through their dairy supply, or we had ones through stats and things like that. So I think there's been quite a bit of miscommunication, which we then changed our communication out to those farmers to say, actually, no, you've got to report through one of these 3 systems. And we saw a bit more of an uptake through that. And then, yeah, I think it's one of those things that it takes time for people to get their head around reporting in a different way to what they had been previously. So we've had an increase from last year, and it seems to be fairly even across between what we've seen an increase in to what other councils have seen as well.
Sorry, have you got a projected amount, or have you got like a KPI to sort of try and achieve for next year, or to make sure we get the improvements, or is there anything else that we as a council need to do to make sure that we're actually getting them properly, getting all of those, because the more data we get, the better?
I don't think I'd be able to say that we've got a KPI as such or anything. It's more around us making sure that we're getting that communication right out to farmers. So there are follow-up letters going out to our dairy farms, and that's through identification through the consents aspect. And you know, and so there's a whole lot of different range. So it's whether we're thanking someone for reporting, or whether we're saying, actually, you haven't reported, you need to report, or you know, for the very few that are over, you're over. So it depends on where they sit in the range as to what letter they're getting.
I've got another question. It's different topic though. So the intensive winter grazing, it's great to have the flyover and everything like that. Are we expecting to see more consents coming through? Because obviously the consent numbers or whatnot compared to what I would expect to see are probably a little bit lower. Is there more education needed in that space, or is it just because it's quite new, or is, you know, what's happening in that space at the moment?
Yes, so through the flights, we actually worked with stakeholder groups in both zones, and the information that we've had back from them has basically been, you know, we need to spend more time out there, more engagement, more education. And so we've had a night actually just last week in the Waimakariri district that came out of the back of that, and we very much got that same feel from the Ashburton stakeholder group as well, and especially for the areas that we hadn't worked with stakeholder groups, their feedback to us was actually no, those areas probably had more engagement, and we're working towards that a lot quicker, whereas their feeling was that other areas were needing more input as well. So that's been part of our thought process going forward. And then also too, we know that there's been a lot of farmers who have looked at how they can make changes to stick within that permitted activity status, rather than going down the consenting line. So there's a few more coming through, and we do get quite a number of queries coming through in that space around, you know, whether they can make those changes or where it fits for them. So yeah, probably maybe a little bit slower. I probably would just caveat the consent numbers versus farm numbers, because there are 4 global consents within that consent number. And those 4 global consents cover large numbers of farms. So, you know, 2 of them come through from irrigation schemes, and, you know, so that's quite large areas in the mid-Canterbury area. So, yeah.
Okay, Councillor Mackenzie and then Councillor Southwest.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You referenced that the new regulations for freshwater farm plan implementation would have long-term plan implications. Are you allowed to tell us what that number might be, the cost might be?
Thank you. Through the chair, there's still some uncertainty around those costs, but they will be discussed as part of the long-term plan discussions. At the moment, we're estimating around 300,000 per year over the next 10 years.
Yep.
Councillor Southwest.
Yeah, thank you. So this goes back to Dion's questions, but probably like point I would have started, they were good questions, but just in terms of the percentages of farms, so it says 58% have responded and submitted information. Am I right in thinking it should, like, the target would be 100% of that 1,334? Like, is that all the farms we would expect, and that they should all?
Ideally, we will have situations where 2 farms may get reported together or something like that. So there's all those sort of details that can come into it. Ideally, yes. I think the reality is that it will take a while for us to get there and work through some of those complications. So, you know, yeah, we would like to see it above that now, and hopefully through these letters going out, we will see an increase then. Yeah, it's like any regulation.
I hadn't picked out the clear sentence that said these are the number of farms we need to see report from, and so I'm just checking if that's the case. Thank you.
Oh, yes, sorry. And one of the resources that we do utilise for this as well is also our land management advisors and our other staff that are out on the ground that have these conversations as part of their, whether it's our RMOs with their consent monitoring or whether it's general farm visits. We speak about it at a lot of our community engagement events as well. So it's just the constant bringing it up. And we are also in close contact with our dairy companies. We meet with them every couple of months to discuss it too. So they're very involved and are promoting that to their suppliers too.
Okay, we've got Councillor Pauling and then Councillor Circle.
Kia ora. Hey, thanks for this. You know, really good to get this update. It's showing us what's happening and what's to come. I was just going back. So the 1,334 consented dairy farms. So that's under our land and water plan. They're the ones that have been consented for farming activities. Have we got more that need to be consented, say because of PC7, or are they already captured? So can you tell me about that?
Yeah, so the consented dairy farms that we've got there, that's been around our dairy effluent consents. So the most, I would be surprised if we have many people that sit outside of that have a dairy farm, and it was part of the reason why we used the effluent consents for this rather than farming land use consent or some other form of discharge consent, because it was the one that we knew that would cover our dairy ones, because they're the ones that have to report versus another farm system.
Oh, can I have a follow up? And just going on to the intensive winter grazing stuff. So are we there? We're good. I'm happy to wait, but
no, where you go?
Yeah, I mean, and down back to the
that are exceeding that limit, so that's good data to have. And the intensive winter grazing, I mean, just that the 19 complaints again, is that out of about the same number, or out of the 1,300 farms? Is that about the same? I mean, just trying to get an idea about, is 19 complaints really bad, or is it, you know, is the sort of proportion of it something that we should be scared about or something?
So the nitrogen fertilizer rules are separate completely. So the 1,300 farms only relates to the fertilizer reporting. The intensive winter grazing, in fact, actually, I think probably the majority of those complaints were not on dairy farms. They were on potentially dairy support, sheep and beef, arable properties that are running dairy support. It was quite a wide range. It probably speaks to that there's more focus on this topic now, generally, and so I think a lot more people are out there looking at it, potentially looking for it. And we also had a very, very wet winter, which showed up things to general public that may look bad, but actually wasn't exceeding the rules, or as you can see, where it was, whether there was action or whether there was advice given, depending on the situation at the time. We did see a couple of properties who had, because these rules came in post a lot of the crops being planted. So, in terms of what people could do. So we did see a number of areas where there was crop in the ground, but people had fenced it off so they weren't using it and things like that. So there was a fair few of those that we came across as well.
Councillor Slickle and then Mackenzie again, is that right? Yep.
Thank you for this. I just wonder what role farm environment plans play in this process, having been through. So when we're doing the audit of my farm environment plan, those questions about nitrogen use, phosphate use and the likes are there. Have you reported? What are your numbers? Equally, tomorrow, my Fonterra report, again, those same questions will be asked. What's my nitrogen use? What are my environmental? So what other capture, what other processes are sitting there to capture this information if people are not reporting? And I won't go into my views on the reporting of this, but where do we see, or what opportunities there are through farm environment plans and other processes to understand the outcome, maybe, as opposed to just the reporting?
So it's quite a hard one where we've got a Canterbury specific program around farm environment plans, and we know that our auditors are asking those questions, and that's around them having confidence in what's going on the property. Are you exceeding, are you within your limits? And then also too, a lot of that is around their confidence on the nitrogen loss versus the inputs as well. Because this is a national regulation, we kind of don't have the same ability as what we would if this was a regional regulation to be able to join the two systems together. Ideally, that would be great, but it doesn't seem to quite fit in that way. And then the other conversations that we've had with the likes of Fonterra, we've been able to see sort of some of their thoughts around where they see everyone sitting, but the reporting systems that they've got are slightly different as well. And so what's kind of being reported through them doesn't also then meet the same as what's going into their reporting tool for the regulation, because the reporting tool was quite specific around the grazed pastoral areas, and whereas the Fonterra nitrogen use often brings in other fertilizer use as well. So it's one of those things where there's a lot of different reporting, but none of it exactly matches up, which is very frustrating for farmers.
Ask a supplementary then. If the auditor sat at my kitchen table and said you have not done your nitrogen reporting, is that a big enough cross in that box to downgrade my farm environment plan audit from an A to a B or a C? Is there something within that process that actually challenges if it is a requirement of the process? What are the implications in that audit process?
That would be something I'd have to come back to you on. Sorry, I don't have the answer to that one at the moment. I'm not sure where we've got to with that, but I can ask our auditor, the girl who runs our auditing system, and yeah, we'll be able to provide an answer for that.
Okay, Councillor Mackenzie.
Yeah, I just wanted to go back to Craig's question of Sarah. And is it fair to say that because Craig's question was really about wintering dairy cows, that some of the complaints were probably involved other animal livestock, other types other than dairy farmers? So deer farming, I'm aware of at least, I think 2 of them might have been deer farmers.
Yes, it was ranged right across the stock types, and because this regulation does cover all stock types,
it's, yeah, so we've definitely seen ones across the sheep and beef and deer sector as well.
Okay, I have one question, clarity, and it relates to the FEP going to the freshwater farm plans and the role of the audit and the difference between the current system that we have here in Canterbury and the proposed system where the independent auditor checks the action plan has been implemented. My understanding is that the auditor has to come in within a certain time frame after the freshwater farm plan has been certified, and yet the actions that a farmer may anticipate doing or have scheduled to do or plan to do could be over a number of years. How does an auditor or the independent auditor come along and actually do his role, do his function? Because it does seem a little bit at odds when you have to get him in 18 months to check that you've done what you say you're going to do.
Thank you. Yes, so the auditor in the freshwater farm plan system is quite different from our existing audit in the sense that freshwater farm plan was certified with that sort of front-end loading, checking that the risk assessment and the actions meet are adequate to address those risks. There's a lot more emphasis on that, and the audit, as you say, is more of a backwards look. Has this been done? Recognising that if they've scheduled out actions over a 5-year time frame, and that the plan, the audit may happen before that full 5 years has happened, and they can only tick off the ones that have been scheduled for that first period.
Just making my position around this clear, because it really it does seem at odds when you can't expect people to actually get in and do their action plan within a year or 18 months. They're going to have to be staged. They just haven't got the vehicle. But no, well, thank you very much for that, Fiona. Does anybody else have any questions of clarity around this paper? Thank you. That's a very good indication that it was a very good and full paper that's been presented. So thank you, staff. You may leave the table. We have some recommendations here that are on page 40 of your agenda. So I'm not going to read them all. Do we have a mover for these recommendations? Councillor Pauling, and a seconder, Councillor Southworth. Does anybody wish to have any further discussion before we vote on them? If there isn't, I will put them to the vote. All those in favour say aye. Against? So that's carried. Thank you very much. So that takes us to agenda item 8.5, page 49 of your agenda. And we have Johannes showing up here on the screen, our zone manager for Central, and he's going to introduce this report. So Johannes, the floor is yours.
Kia ora koutou, can you hear me? I'm on my phone, unfortunately. Through the chair, thank you for receiving the paper on practically a stock take of past year's zone delivery priority projects and a brief outlook into what we're planning or already starting to deliver for this financial year. I'll take the paper as read. If there are any questions around clarification, happy to take questions.
Yep, we have a couple here, so we'll go Councillor.
Sorry, Johannes. Hey, thanks for this report. It's really great to see the sort of breadth of projects going on across the major zones there. Just remind me. So it says that the budget for this 300k, is this above the zone committee money that they also allocate?
Yes, so zone committee money is a completely different funding stream that's linked to the zone committee's action plan. This is goods and services within zone delivery right across compliance, land management, biodiversity, and incident response.
Fantastic. So yeah, I think that's good So are there any projects that overlap though with the zone committee ones that might receive the same funding?
They overlap in the sense of geography, or sometimes it's co-funded because it may align with the zone committee's action plan, or it's a multi-year funding where zone delivery started and the zone committee has joined. So there's various ways. Sometimes it's not funding, sometimes it's staff time, and it's funded through grant of the zone committee. So there's a whole range of mix of how these projects ultimately get delivered.
That's good. And I think in the context of looking forward for long-term plan, I think this is a highlight for us about what you can do with a little bit extra money and how much you can achieve across the region. So thank you.
So, kia ora, Johannes, just in terms of the 300,000, is that spent, does that include staff time, or is that specifically for sort of on the ground materials, or, you know, that type of thing? How does that get split up?
So the 300 is purely goods and services to sort of support projects right across the region that align with strategic priorities or a sort of multi-agency sort of delivery. Staff time is separate to this.
And then can I ask on the, it mentions under financial implications that there's funding rounds have also covered 220,000 for soil conservation for the SCAR project. So that, is that in addition to the 300,000, or is that coming out of the 300,000 over a number of years?
So we were meant, this goods and services for zone delivery was meant to increase by, I'm not 100% sure what the funding support there is, because there might be quite a bit of in-kind staff time, or it's below, like I said, I haven't captured everything under 5K. So it may be other funding streams, both within the organization and through other contributions that we're part of that. So I'm not 100% sure about the fine detail. We can find out if that's what you'd like, but I'm not 100% over that particular project.
No, you sort of missed the point of my question, because there's none of the funding that you're talking about goes into that project. But in terms of zone delivery, the zone delivery program, in terms of implementing the zones, the zone implementation plan, a major part of the Hines Plains part of that was to do managed aquifer recharge, targeted stream augmentation, and near river recharge. Though none of that is funded out of the fund you're specifically referring to.
That's
I'm not
correct.
questioning the funding. I'm just talking about the fact that it's one of the main zone programs. It's not included in your list of programs.
So can I just help here, Johannes? I think there could be a little bit of misunderstanding of the two things. This is the zone delivery team that we have spread across the region versus zone committees or water zone committees within each TA. There is a difference here and a different funding pool. That's correct, is my understanding, Johannes?
That's correct. And I suppose the paper in front of you doesn't give you the full work program of the zone teams. So there's more stuff where it's delivered through staff time and other things. So this doesn't cover everything we do. This just highlights the projects that have been financially supported from the zone delivery priority. But
thank you, Chair, and through you. Yes, so the work with the Managed Aquifer Recharge Heke Hines Water Enhancement Trust is funded out of the Freshwater Resilience program within the long-term plan, which sits alongside the zone priority projects, but it's not captured within the allocation of funding that Johannes has been talking to today.
Yeah, again, I understand that. I'm not questioning that. What I'm saying is that the second recommendation is talking about the zone delivery program. Now, the zone delivery program is more than just the stuff that's funded by the Zone Delivery Priority Project Funding Program. And there's a whole lot of stuff going on in the zones. And I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that there was a whole lot of stuff going on in the zones as part of their delivery program on trying to improve environmental outcome. And not all those they aren't captured in this document. And so perhaps the wording of the headline for this report should have been specific about the funding, what is funded under that particular fund, rather than the zone delivery program, which to me is more of a generic term, if you get that. I mean, that's only the point I'm trying to make. I'm not criticising anybody,
Thank you, Councillor Mackenzie. I think the report would be quite big if we included everything in this one report, but we've got to acknowledge all the work that everybody does around improving our environmental outcomes throughout the community. Councillor Karakia, and then back to Councillor Pauling. Oh, sorry.
Claire.
Sorry. Carry on, Councillor Karakia, and then I'll come back to Councillor Swiggs, who I forgot.
Thank you. Kia ora, Johannes. Hey, this is just a question that may not actually even fit into this one, but it was about where does the funding come from around the river rating committees? Does it come? It doesn't come through here, does it? No.
No. That
Okay.
that comes through the river's budget.
Okay, thank you. Thanks. Yeah, clarified. Kia ora.
Councillor Swiggs.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, God. Chair. That was a Freudian slip. I apologise. Johannes, how many of these projects have been? It's really cool to see that 300,000 has enabled nearly $2 million worth of work, which is great. But how much of that funding from the partner agency or the other funder that we've enabled or leveraged has been from Jobs for Nature?
Great question. Not a lot. So this funding, Job for Nature came in later. So a lot of the projects you see there are multi-year commitments, and in many cases, it was, for example, the Ministry for the Environment Freshwater Enhancement Fund, I think it was called. So take, for example, some of the Christchurch project, the Avoca Valley. Our clear commitment for 3 years to be a partner in this enabled this project to gain nearly $700,000 to deliver. But the crucial bit was that we said right from the start, this delivers on what ECAN's outcome is. And through zone delivery, we can support you both through staff and advice as well as funding. But it was the key bit to get this project across the line. Jobs for Nature came in through COVID, but I'm not aware of. No, I don't think. Don't quote me on this, but I'm not aware of any of those linked to Jobs for Nature at this point in time.
No, that's cool.
Oh, sorry.
Look, Karakia, can you please turn your camera off? Anyway, sorry, Johannes, the reason I was asking that question, obviously Jobs for Nature is ending, and I'm just when I was reading through this and obviously with everything else, I'm just worried that our influence in being able to leverage what we have with all the other pressures going on is going to be diminished. So I just wanted to sort of make sure that we were not overcommitted in that to get the outcomes that we want. And I've actually lost my train of thought. There was something else, but Nook's put me off. So that was the main thing anyway. Thanks, Johannes.
Thank you. Once again, we'll go to Councillor Pauling.
Yeah, I know a couple of them, Dion, are Jobs for Nature related, but most of them aren't. So I think it's a really good range of projects. And this just goes back again, like I think it's really awesome, that point that Dion made, that a small amount of money has enabled a lot of work. And this is my pitch, and it does relate to Ian's point too. I think this is a sitter, and especially going forward as we do our long-term plan, is about mapping this work we're doing so we can see the spread of it across the region. But also, then you can add another layer with what Ian's talked about, so we can see that there is overlap and that every different program under our LTP is having slightly a different effect, and that there's not double dipping, for example, or if there is, it's because there's a good reason for them to overlap and to support each other. So I'm going to just make it clear again that when we head into our LTP and we get all those programs finally locked in, and it's especially to help not just us as governors, but for our community too, so they can see actually we're doing an amazing job, and especially in this area, and look what we're able to do across the region. And this list of all the projects is fantastic. So just really want to highlight that, and so we can communicate it better to our community and to us.
A bit of discussion there. We'll go back to another question of clarity from Councillor Swings.
Yeah, no, actually that was it kind of related to my what I was going to ask before I had my look moment. But it's around the communication of this, and is there a way that and I think it might be a question Taff might be able to answer, is there a way to take this paper and actually put something out about what's been going on? Because there's a lot of stuff that is in there. I actually think it's communication part would be great.
Yep, through you, Chair. Yes, is the short answer. So a lot of these have already gone out as individual projects and topics as they sort of taken place. So there is some information that's gone out individually, but we've certainly been thinking about how do we now collectively put this out now that this paper has been through this committee, putting it out as a whole, and also to Councillor Pauling's comment around clarifying what this work is versus, for example, the Y Fund and other work that we're doing ourselves. So yeah, just trying to package that up because there's a lot of good work in here that can be pulled out. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. If there is no further questions of clarity, I'll thank you, Johannes, for coming in, and you can step back at this point in time. Maybe carry on with whatever you were doing. So, yeah. Yeah. So just saying, turn your camera off. You probably couldn't see what we could see with our councillor Karakia. So we have some recommendations here, which I've just flicked up on the board there. Do I have a mover and a second for them? Councillor Pauling's going to move. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Sanko, thank you very much. Is there any further discussion? I mean, I think for me, when this agenda was being developed, this was one of the papers that I really did enjoy reading about and seeing all the work, and certainly acknowledge the point that Councillor Swiggs made about the leverage that had been gained from such a relatively small amount of money. And I guess it just shows you that we don't need to go out and actually do all the work, and it's about how we actually encourage it and enable it on the ground. So just thank the team that's involved in this, and obviously, as Councillor Pauling said, it could be presented quite nicely on a graphic map for our community's consumption. But I'm sure that I can rely on several councillors that sit on this table putting a link to this paper on their social media pretty quickly. So, yeah. So yeah, just thank you all for that. So does anybody else want to make a comment? I mean, Councillor Pauling's had a comment there that's very valid. If there isn't, we'll put that motion there that's been put by Councillor Pauling, seconded by Councillor Sanko. All in favour say aye. Against? Carried. So thank you very much for that. So that takes us to agenda item 10, which is the date of, I'm reading the paper. Sorry, agenda item 9, the next meeting. And that is scheduled for the 29th of November 2023. And then I will go to 10, which is the closing Karakia, and go back to Councillor Pauling for that.
Kia ora, Claire. We could leave this open until after the workshops, and then we'll finish off. So, kia ora, thank you.
Everybody's happy with that? We'll do that. Just to comment that the PowerPoint that was presented this morning was sent out in an email on Monday afternoon. And so if you're looking for that, maybe you could go back and look at that, because it was quite a good PowerPoint presentation. And it will come through in the minutes of this meeting. So it will be available in time as well. So thank you, everybody, and we'll close this meeting.